The dining room at Ashcombe Hall glittered with candlelight, 20 guests, crystal glasses, silver polished until it shone like water. And at the far end of the table, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a young woman in a plain gray dress. The new Duke had been master of this house for exactly 3 days. He watched as the footmen carried in the soup beautiful white bowls, steam rising from every single one. Every one except hers. Her bowl had no steam at all. The soup inside it sat flat and pale, like pond water in November. The Duke put down his spoon. The room went quiet, the way rooms do when a powerful man stops eating. And then he asked one simple question, 7 words that would tear this family apart. Why is her bowl different from ours? Nobody answered. The butler's hands trembled. The old Duchess smiled a smile as cold as that soup. And somewhere near the kitchen door, a heavy-set cook appeared for just a moment, then vanished. What the new Duke didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the answer to his question led back 1 full year, back to a death, back to a lie, and back to a secret that someone in this room had killed to protect. To understand it, we must go back to the beginning, back to the night the cold soup started. 1 year earlier, Clara Whitfield had been the happiest young woman in the county. She was 24 years old with dark hair and quick, clever eyes. She was not the daughter of the house. Her own father had died when she was 19. But the old Duke of Ashcombe had been her father's dearest friend, and when Mr. Whitfield lay dying, the Duke had taken his hand and made him a promise. "Your Clara will want for nothing. I give you my word. She will live under my roof as my own child." And he had kept that promise. For 5 years, Clara had a warm room on the 2nd floor, a seat near the head of the table, and something even more precious, a place in the old Duke's heart. He called her my girl. He taught her chess. On winter evenings, she read to him by the fire, and his laughter filled the whole house. The old Duchess, his brother's widow who had lived at Ashcombe Hall for 30 years, watched all of this with narrow eyes. She never said a cruel word. Not then. She simply watched and waited. Then came the night of October the 9th. The old Duke had been unwell for months. Nothing dramatic, stomach pains, weakness, tired legs. The doctor called it age. The Duke called it nonsense. "I'll dance at your wedding, my girl," he told Clara that very evening. "See if I don't." By morning he was gone. Clara stood at his funeral in black, so hollow with grief she could barely feel the rain. She did not notice, at first, how the world was already shifting around her. How Mr. Harrow, the estate steward, a thin man with soft hands and a softer voice, now stood beside the Duchess like a shadow. How the servants had stopped meeting Clara's eyes. She noticed 1 week later. She came down for breakfast and found her chair, near the head of the table occupied by the Duchess's little dog. A footman, red-faced and miserable, quietly showed her to a new seat, at the very end, near the drafty window. "The Duchess thought you would be more comfortable there," he whispered. That afternoon, 2 maids carried Clara's belongings out of her warm 2nd-floor bedroom and up the narrow stairs to the attic. A small room, a cold room, a servant's room. Clara went to the Duchess. She found her in the morning room, calm as still water, with Mr. Harrow standing at her shoulder. "There must be some mistake," Clara said. "The Duke promised my father." "The Duke," said the Duchess, "is dead." She let the word sit in the air like a slap. "And the promises of dead men are not furniture, my dear. They do not stay in the house." Mr. Harrow smiled his soft smile. "You must understand your position, Miss Whitfield. You are not family, you are not a guest. You are a charity, and charity," he spread his soft hands, "is grateful for whatever it receives." Clara had no money of her own, none she could touch, at least. Her father's will had left her something, managed by trustees far away in London, locked up tight until her 25th birthday. 10 months away. Until then, she had nowhere to go and no one to go to. The Duchess knew it, Harrow knew it. And so Clara lifted her chin, said, "I understand perfectly," and walked out of that room with her back straight as a queen's. But that night at dinner, the real message came. The family was served first, as always. The soup that evening was white soup, the old Duke's favorite, and Clara watched the steam rise from the Duchess's bowl, from Harrow's bowl, from every bowl down the long, long table. Then the footman set a bowl in front of Clara. No steam. She touched the porcelain, cold, not cooling, cold, as if it had been standing in the pantry for an hour. She looked up and found the Duchess watching her from the head of the table. "Is something wrong with your soup, Miss Whitfield?" the Duchess asked, sweet as sugar. Every servant in the room held their breath. Clara understood in that moment exactly what this was. It was not a mistake. It was not carelessness. It was a lesson served in a bowl. Complain and you will look ungrateful. Eat and you accept your place. Clara picked up her spoon. "Nothing is wrong, Your Grace," she said quietly. "Thank you." And she ate the cold soup, every drop. The Duchess smiled and turned back to her guests. Somewhere down the table, someone laughed softly at somebody's joke, and the warm noise of dinner rolled on as if nothing had happened. It happened again the next night, and the next, and the next. Warm bowls all around the table and one cold bowl at the end, every single evening, as regular as the church bells. The servants whispered about it in the corridors. "The Duchess's orders," they said, "so the girl remembers what she is." Clara never complained, not once. She ate her cold soup with her back straight, night after night, week after week, and if her eyes shone sometimes in the candlelight, no one at that table ever saw a single tear fall. But here is what Clara did not know. Down in the kitchen every evening the cook, a heavy-set gray-haired woman named Mrs. Pott, who had served at Ashcombe Hall for 20 years, did something strange. When the great pot of soup was ready, she filled one bowl first before anyone else's. Then she carried that one bowl to the far corner of the kitchen, set it on the stone shelf by the window and left it there. Alone, growing cold. And only then did Mrs. Pott allow anyone near the pot. The kitchen maids thought she was following the Duchess's cruel orders. They felt sorry for the girl upstairs, and they said nothing. They were wrong, all of them. Because Mrs. Pott was not following orders. She was breaking them. And the truth about that cold bowl, the truth about what happened to the soup pot after Clara's portion was taken out, was a secret Mrs. Pott intended to carry to her grave. She very nearly did. Winter came early to Ashcombe Hall that year. The frost drew silver ferns on the attic window, and Clara learned to sleep in her shawl. She learned other things too that autumn. She learned that cruelty does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it comes on a silver tray, carried by a footman who cannot look at you. Every evening at 7 o'clock, the family sat down to dinner. And every evening at the far end of the table, one cold bowl was set before Clara Whitfield, as regular as the church bells, as certain as the sunset. By November, it was simply how things were. The Duchess never mentioned it again. She didn't need to. The cold bowl spoke for her every single night. You are nothing here. You eat what charity gives you. Sometimes when guests came to dine, Clara would see them glance at her bowl, then at each other. Nobody ever asked. In fine houses, nobody ever does. Mr. Harrow found his own small ways to help the lesson along. "Miss Whitfield," he would say in his soft, soft voice, "since you have so much idle time, perhaps you might mend the linens. Charity should earn its keep, don't you think?" So Clara mended linens. She wound wool for the Duchess and was told her stitching was clumsy, her posture proud, her presence tiresome. She was moved further down the table until she sat alone below the salt like a stranger who had wandered in from the rain. And still every night she ate the cold soup, every drop, with her back straight and her chin high. "Look at her," the housemaids whispered in the corridors. "Eats it like it's a feast. I'd have thrown the bowl at her Grace's head by now, so I would." "Hush," said the older ones. "The girl's got nowhere to go. Winter outside is colder than any soup." They pitied her, the servants. Some of them left small kindnesses in her path, a warming brick in her bed, a candle stub, an apple in her mending basket. Small, quiet mutinies. Clara treasured every one. But there was one servant who showed her no kindness at all. Mrs. Pott, the cook, had been at Ashcombe Hall for 20 years. She was a big, gray-haired woman with forearms like a blacksmith and a voice that could crack walnuts. The kitchen was her kingdom. Even the butler knocked before entering. In the old days, the good days, Mrs. Pott had always had a smile for Clara, a warm tart on a cold afternoon, an extra spoon of honey in her tea. "Eat up, miss. You're all bones and book learning." Now she would not even look at her. If Clara passed her in the corridor, Mrs. Pott turned her face to the wall. If Clara entered the kitchen, the cook found urgent business in the pantry. Once, just once, Clara tried to speak to her, and Mrs. Pott walked away mid-sentence, shoulders stiff, leaving Clara standing alone by the great iron stove. Even her, Clara thought that night, staring at the attic ceiling. Even Mrs. Pott despises me now. And somehow that small betrayal hurt worse than all the Duchess's coldness put together. She was wrong about Mrs. Pott, terribly, completely wrong, but she would not learn that for a long time yet. December brought snow, and with the snow came Clara's darkest evening so far. It was the night of the Duchess's winter dinner, 20 guests, goose and claret, the good crystal out. Clara had hoped to be forgotten in the attic, but the Duchess sent for her specially. Of course she did. What use is a lesson without an audience? So Clara sat at the very end of the glittering table in her mendied gray dress, while silk and diamonds laughed around her. The soup came out steaming, a rich chestnut soup, the smell of it enough to make her empty stomach ache. And then her bowl arrived, cold, in front of everyone. A young gentleman beside her, some cousin of somebody, noticed. He frowned at her bowl, then at his own, and opened his mouth. For one wild moment, Clara thought someone was finally going to say it out loud. The Duchess's voice slid down the table like ice on glass. "Miss Whitfield prefers her soup cold. Isn't that right, my dear? Such humble tastes." Laughter, light, polite, poisonous laughter up and down the table. The young gentleman looked away, embarrassed, and said nothing after all. Clara sat very still. Her eyes burned. Her hands, hidden in her lap, curled into fists and then slowly uncurled. No, not in front of her, never in front of her. She picked up her spoon. She smiled, actually smiled, and said, clear enough for the whole table to hear. "Quite right, Your Grace. It keeps the flavor honest." For half a heartbeat, something flickered in the Duchess's eyes. Not amusement, not anger. Something colder, the look a chess player gives a pawn that has just moved in a way pawns should not move. Clara lowered her eyes and began to eat. And that was when she felt it. Her spoon touched something at the bottom of the bowl, something small, something that was not soup. Her heart stumbled. She kept her face perfectly calm. 5 years in this house had taught her that much, and moved the spoon gently, feeling the shape of it. Small, soft, folded. Paper. Someone had put paper in her soup. Clara did not dare fish it out at the table. She did what any sensible prisoner does with contraband. She hid it. A cough, a napkin raised to her lips, a sleight of hand her father, the card lover, would have applauded, and the tiny, soup-soaked bundle disappeared into her sleeve. The dinner rolled on. The goose came and went. The Duchess told her stories. The guests laughed their laughs, and nobody paid any attention at all to the quiet girl at the end of the table who sat with her heart hammering and a secret pressed against her wrist. It was past midnight when Clara finally climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, shielding her candle stub with one hand. She sat on the edge of her bed. She listened to the house go quiet, room by room, door by door. Then, with shaking fingers, she drew out the little bundle and unfolded it. It was a scrap of kitchen paper no bigger than a playing card. The soup had soaked it through and the ink had bled and feathered, but the hand that wrote it had pressed hard enough that the words survived. 4 words, no name, no explanation. Eat nothing else. Clara read it once, twice, 10 times. She turned it over, searching for more, and found nothing but a grease stain shaped like a half-moon. Eat nothing else. Nothing else. But what? The cold soup. Was that it? Eat only the soup. But why? The soup was the insult. The soup was the punishment. Why would anyone? And then a thought came to Clara Whitfield, there in the freezing attic, by the light of a dying candle. A thought so quiet and so terrible that it made the hair rise on her arms. Unless the soup is the only thing in this house that is safe. Downstairs, far below her feet, the great kitchen fire had burned down to embers. Mrs. Potts sat alone beside it in her old wooden chair, as she did every night now, her big hands folded in her lap, watching the last light die. "Forgive me, miss," she whispered to nobody at all. "It's the only way I know how." Clara did not sleep that night. She lay in the freezing attic with the note pressed flat under her pillow, and she thought. She thought the way her father had taught her to think at the chessboard. Don't ask what the move looks like. Ask why it was made. Someone in that kitchen had risked their place, perhaps more than their place, to smuggle 4 words into her bowl. Nobody takes a risk like that for a joke. Nobody takes a risk like that for a girl they despise. Someone was trying to protect her, which meant someone believed she needed protecting. Eat nothing else. By morning, Clara had made her decision. She could not understand the warning, but she could obey it. It was easier than she expected, and harder. Easier because nobody at Ashcombe Hall cared what the charity girl ate. Harder because hunger is a patient enemy. At breakfast, she took tea and touched nothing. "I find I have no appetite in the mornings," she said quietly, and Mr. Harrow smiled his soft smile and said appetite was a luxury of the useful. At luncheon she claimed a delicate stomach. The sweets and puddings that appeared at dinner, the lovely little almond cakes, the wine jellies the Duchess sometimes sent down the table to her with pointed generosity, she pushed gently around her plate and left. Only the cold soup she ate, every drop every night. And here is the strange thing, the thing that turned her cold with something that was not the attic air. For weeks she realized it only now, counting backward. Clara had not been well, headaches that came and went, a gnawing, twisting ache in her stomach after dinner, a heaviness in her legs on the stairs. She had blamed grief. She had blamed the cold room and the thin blankets. Everyone knows sorrow makes the body ache. 2 weeks after she began obeying the note, the headache stopped. The stomach pains faded, then vanished. She climbed the attic stairs one evening in January and realized she had not felt that dragging weight in her legs for days. Clara stood on the landing with her candle, very still. Grief does not stop because you stopped eating almond cakes. She thought she could not help thinking of the old Duke, of his last months, stomach pains, the doctor had said, weak legs, age, your grace, simple age, and the Duke laughing it off. "I'll dance at your wedding, my girl, see if I don't." He had been strong as an ox at Michaelmas. He was in his grave by October. Clara's candle shook just a little. She told herself she was being fanciful. She told herself grief plants wicked ideas in lonely minds. She told herself all the sensible things and did not believe a single one of them. There was one more thing she needed to understand, and it concerned money. Her money. Clara Whitfield was not, in fact, penniless. Her father, quiet, clever Mr. Whitfield, who had made his fortune in trade and never once apologized for it, had left his only child everything he had. But he had left it locked away, in a trust managed by his lawyers in London, untouchable until her 25th birthday. "Money is a fine servant and a terrible master, Clara mine," he used to say. "You'll have yours when you're old enough to be its master." Her 25th birthday was the 17th of June, 5 months away. She had never thought much about the trust. It was a thing far away in a locked box in London, watched over by her guardian. But her guardian was dead, so who watched over it now? She found her answer in February, and she found it by accident. She had written to her father's lawyers a simple letter, asking after the trust, asking what would become of it now the Duke was gone. She gave it to the footman for the post, as she always did. 3 days later, passing the open door of the estate office, she saw it. Her own letter, opened, lying flat on Mr. Harrow's desk beside his neat black ledgers, while Harrow himself stood at the window reading a second letter, and Clara knew her father's lawyer's heavy cream paper when she saw it. He was reading her post. He had been reading it all along, both ways, every letter she sent, every letter that never seemed to arrive. Harrow turned. For a moment they looked at each other across the office, the charity girl in the doorway, the steward with her life in his soft white hands. "Miss Whitfield," he said pleasantly, "you look pale. You should take better care of yourself." He folded the lawyer's letter slowly and slid it into a drawer. "So little standing between you and the world these days. It would be a pity if your health failed." He smiled, and Clara understood that she had just been threatened, gently and perfectly, in a way she could never repeat to another living soul without sounding mad. She was, by then, beginning to look the part. A woman cannot live on one bowl of soup and scraps of bread forever. By late February, Clara was thin. Her gray dress hung loose at the waist. Her face had gone pale and sharp. Her eyes seemed too large. She was, though she did not know it, becoming exactly what the house needed her to become. Consumption, the housemaids whispered. Poor thing, wasting away. Melancholy, the butler said gravely. Grief has turned her mind against food. The Duchess said nothing at all. She simply watched Clara across the dinner table, night after night, the way a farmer watches the weather. And in March, with a great show of Christian concern, she sent for a doctor. Not the old village doctor who had known Clara for years. He, it turned out, had retired quite suddenly at Christmas. This was a new man, Dr. Marsh, a smooth, nodding gentleman from town, with a gold watch chain and a way of speaking to the Duchess while examining Clara, as if Clara were a horse of uncertain value. He held her wrist. He looked at her tongue. He asked her 3 questions and listened to none of the answers. "Refuses food, you say," he murmured. "Secretive habits, sits alone, writes letters at night." He shook his head slowly. "Nerves, your grace, a disturbance of the nervous system. Grief can unseat a young woman's mind, particularly one of irregular background." "You see how it is, doctor," said the Duchess softly. "We are at our wits' end. We only want what is best for her." They spoke as though Clara were not in the room, and then Dr. Marsh said the word. He lowered his voice to say it, the way people lower their voices for certain words, for cancer, and bankruptcy and scandal. But Clara heard it. He said it just as the maid was closing the drawing-room door, and it slid through the gap like a draught of cold air. "May I suggest, your grace, that you begin to consider an asylum?" Clara walked up the attic stairs that night very slowly, holding the banister like an old woman. Now she understood the game, understood it whole. They did not need her to die. How untidy, how suspicious, 2 deaths in one house in 1 year. No, they only needed her mad asterisk. Mad girls sign nothing. Mad girls inherit nothing. Mad girls are locked away with the family's tearful blessing, and their trustees deal thereafter with their guardians, with the kind, concerned people who visit twice a year and manage everything on their behalf. They had 5 months to get her declared insane, and every meal she refused, every pound she lost, every midnight letter she wrote, all of it built their case for them. The trap was perfect. Eating was poison. Not eating was madness. Clara sat down on her narrow bed and laughed, one short, sharp breath of a laugh, because the only other choice was to weep, and she had promised herself long ago that this house would never see her weep. Then she stopped laughing. Because if all of this was true, the tonic-sick summer, the stomach pains, the strong old man in his grave by October, then it meant one more thing. The thing she had been refusing to think for 2 months. The old Duke had not died of age. The old Duke had been murdered, slowly, patiently, under this roof at that table by a hand that everyone trusted. And Clara Whitfield, alone in a freezing attic, thin as paper, with no money, no friends, and a doctor's report already drying its ink. Clara Whitfield was the only person in the world who suspected it. 5 months asterisk, she thought. Hold on for 5 months. Down in the great cold kitchen, Mrs. Pott banked the fire for the night and set tomorrow's stock to soak. On the stone shelf by the window stood a single clean bowl, waiting, as it waited every night. She did not know how much longer she could keep the girl alive on soup and silence. But as God was her witness, she meant to try. Spring came, and with it, Clara's 25th birthday. The 17th of June, the day her father had promised her, the day the locked box in London was supposed to open, and Clara Whitfield was supposed to become the master of her own life. The day came, the day went, nothing happened at all. Because a locked box does not open by itself, and a fortune does not walk from London to find you. To claim her trust, Clara had to reach her father's lawyers in writing, or in person, before witnesses. And every letter she sent died on Mr. Harrow's desk. And every letter the lawyers sent back was answered. She was sure of it now by Harrow himself, in the name of her devoted guardians, explaining with great sorrow that Miss Whitfield remained too ill, too fragile, too disturbed in her mind to attend to business. Once in July, she tried another way. A young footman named Thomas, a kind boy who had never forgotten how she'd nursed his scalded hand with honey the summer before, agreed to carry a letter to the village post himself, quiet-like on his half-day. 3 days later, Thomas was dismissed. No character, no references, no reason given. Clara watched from the attic window as he walked down the long avenue in the rain with his box on his shoulder, and something in her chest turned to stone. They will destroy anyone who helps me. So she stopped asking for help. She grew quieter, thinner, and more alone, and the house's whispers wrote her legend for her. Mad Miss Whitfield, who eats nothing, speaks to no one, and walks the attic floor at night. Dr. Marsh visited twice more that summer, nodding, murmuring, writing, building his file, page by patient page. There was only one thing, that whole burning summer, that stood between Clara and the asylum. One thin, ridiculous shield. The law required 2 doctors to sign the certificate, and the second doctor, a stubborn young physician newly settled in the village, a Dr. Fell, who owed the Duchess nothing, had examined Clara in August, listened to her speak for a full hour, and then said, in the flat voice of a man who does not care whom he offends, "This woman is not mad, she is starving. There is a difference, your grace, and I'd stake my license on it." The Duchess smiled and thanked him and sent him away, and Harrow began, that same week, making quiet inquiries about doctors in town who were more understanding. It was a race now, though only 3 people in the house knew it. And then, in September, God or fate or the War Office dealt a new card that none of them expected. The heir was found. They had been looking for him for nearly a year, the lawyers, the College of Arms, all the machinery that grinds into motion when a duke dies without a son. The line had to be traced back 3 generations and out along a thin, forgotten branch, to a soldier. Major Nathaniel Vane, 34 years old, of no fortune and no fashion, currently serving with his regiment abroad. A man who had never set foot in Ashcombe Hall. A man who, when the letter reached him in a dusty garrison town and informed him he was now the Duke of Ashcombe, reportedly read it twice and said, "Good God, there must be some mistake." There was no mistake, and on the 3rd of October, almost a year to the day since the old Duke's death, a hired carriage came up the long avenue through the autumn mist, and the new master of Ashcombe Hall stepped out into the courtyard with one trunk, one sword, and the wariest eyes the butler had ever seen on a gentleman. The Duchess had prepared for this arrival, the way generals prepare for invasions. She met him in the great hall in her finest black silk, all warmth and welcome and gentle instruction. "Dear Nathaniel, may I call you Nathaniel? We are family now." She would guide him, she explained. The estate was so complex, society so treacherous, and he had been so long away from England. He need not trouble himself with the household. Everything ran perfectly. Everything was in hand. "You'll find Mr. Harrow indispensable," she said. The old Duke trusted him with everything. "Did he?" said the new Duke. Harrow, for his part, deployed flattery the way other men deploy artillery, carefully ranged, and in overwhelming quantity. Within a day he had praised the Duke's war record, his handwriting, his seat on a horse, and his remarkable grasp of drainage. The Duke received it all with a courtesy so complete, so smooth, so utterly unreadable, that Harrow reported to the Duchess that evening that the new master would be no trouble at all. A simple soldier, manageable. They were, both of them, making the same mistake. They had heard asterisk soldier and thought blunt instrument, but Nathaniel Vane had not survived 12 years of war by being blunt. He had survived by noticing things. Which sentry was nervous? Which village was too quiet? Which man's story changed slightly in the retelling? In Ashcombe Hall, he thought, standing at his window that first night, looking out over the dark gardens, Ashcombe Hall was a very quiet village indeed. On his 3rd evening, the Duchess held a dinner in his honor. 20 guests, crystal and silver, the good candles lit, the county assembling to inspect its new Duke. And it was there, at the far end of that glittering table, that he first truly saw her. A young woman in a plain gray dress, thin as a winter branch, seated below the salt like a stranger. She had been presented to him on his first day in a blur of names: Miss Whitfield, a ward of the late Duke. We keep her out of charity, and she had curtsied and vanished, and the Duchess had steered him onward. Now the footmen came in with the soup. White bowls, all down the table, each one breathing its little ghost of steam into the candlelight. He might never have noticed. He noticed everything. One bowl, hers, had no steam at all. The Duke watched her touch the cold porcelain without surprise, without a glance of complaint, and begin to eat, her back straight as a lance. He watched the guests around her not see it, in the practiced way of people who have decided not to see something. He put down his spoon. The room went quiet, the way rooms do when a powerful man stops eating. Why is her bowl different from ours? 7 words. He said them mildly, almost gently, a man asking about the weather. The silence that followed was anything but mild. The butler's hands trembled over the decanter. Down the table, a fork stopped halfway. At the service door, a broad, gray-haired woman in cook's whites appeared for half a moment in the gap, and was gone. And the girl in gray went perfectly, absolutely still. She did not look up. She looked, the Duke thought, like a soldier in a trench who hears the shell coming and knows there is nowhere to go. Then the Duchess laughed, a light, silvery, well-rehearsed laugh, and the room breathed again. "How observant you are, Duke. It's her digestion, poor child. Hot food disagrees with her. The doctor insists on a cooling diet. We have grown so used to her little ways, we quite forget how odd it must look. A tender glance down the table. Isn't that so, my dear? A heartbeat, too. Yes, Your Grace, said Clara Whitfield to her bowl. The doctor insists. Conversation flowed back in like a tide, filling the hole in the evening until it was as if it had never been. The Duchess turned the talk to hunting. Harrow told an amusing story about a bishop. The new Duke laughed in the right places, agreed the pheasant was excellent, and gave every appearance of a simple soldier enjoying his good fortune. But 12 years of war had taught Nathaniel Vane exactly what a lie sounds like. It sounds smooth. It sounds prepared. It arrives a half-second too quickly, wearing a smile like an answer that has been standing by the door with its coat on, waiting for the question. Her digestion, asterisk, he thought, watching the candlelight, keeping his voice pleasant and his face open, giving them nothing. A cooling diet. And the girl agrees to her bowl, not to me, and the butler pours with shaking hands, and my cook hides behind doors, and this whole magnificent house is the quietest village I have ever walked into. He had asked his question at the table, and been handed a lie on silver. Very well, he knew another way. It had served him in 3 campaigns and never failed him yet. If you want the truth about the officers, went the oldest rule in the army, ask it in the kitchen. The new Duke went to war the way he knew best, quietly. He asked no more questions at dinner. He signed what Harrow put in front of him after reading every line twice, which Harrow found tedious but not alarming. He let the Duchess parade him through the county's drawing rooms, and smiled and was agreeable and noticed everything. He noticed that Miss Whitfield had begun taking her meals upstairs. Her nerves, poor child, said the Duchess. Company distresses her. He noticed that a tray still went up every evening, and that the soup on it, by the time it had climbed 3 staircases, would have been stone cold anyway, which struck him as a very convenient sort of arrangement. He noticed that whenever he so much as drifted in the direction of the kitchens, some urgent matter materialized in his path, Harrow with papers, the Duchess with introductions, once the butler with a question about port that the man had plainly invented on the stairs. They heard me, he thought, with something like professional admiration, politely, beautifully, the way you'd heard a bull you can't afford to anger. He was a patient man. He let himself be herded by day. The nights were his own. They always had been. 12 years of war had left Nathaniel Vane with a soldier's gift for sleeping anywhere and a soldier's curse of not sleeping at all. And on the bad nights, when the old sounds came back, he had learned it was better to walk than to lie in the dark listening to them. Ashcombe Hall by night was a different country. No Duchess, no Harrow, just moonlight on 400 years of floorboards. He walked it like a sentry, learning it, and that was how, some nights into his new life, at nearly 1 in the morning, he saw a thin blade of candlelight under the library door. He opened it without a sound, old habits, and found a thief. The thief was seated in the window bay with her feet tucked under her, wrapped in a gray shawl, reading by a single candle stub, and she was so deep in her book that she did not hear the door at all. For a long moment the Duke of Ashcombe stood in his own library and studied Miss Clara Whitfield as if she were terrain. By candlelight, without the Duchess's gaze pressing down on her, she looked entirely different. Not odd, not mad, just young and fierce with concentration, and so thin it hurt to look at her. "You'll ruin your eyes," he said. She moved faster than any creature he had ever startled. The book vanished behind a cushion, her feet found the floor, and she was up and composed and curtsying in the space of a breath. It was smoothly done. It was, he thought, the practiced smoothness of someone who has learned exactly what it costs to be caught. "Your Grace, forgive me. I had the late Duke's leave to use the library. I forget myself. It won't happen again." Miss Whitfield. He stayed where he was, unhurried, hands behind his back. It's 1 o'clock in the morning and this is the first room in this house I've liked. If you leave, I'll be obliged to sit in it alone, and I've had enough of my own company for one night. Stay, please. She stayed, warily at the far end of the room the way a cat stays. He did not ask about the cushion. He did not ask about the bowl. He asked instead whether she played chess. He'd found a board in the corner, ivory and rosewood, clearly much used, and something crossed her face, quick as a bird's shadow. I did. The late Duke taught me. We played every winter evening for 5 years. Then you're better than I am, he said, setting up the pieces. Good. I'm sick of people in this house letting me win at things. They played. She beat him in 30 moves, and he laughed the first genuine laugh he'd had inside these walls, and demanded another game, and she beat him again, slower, because this time he'd stopped being polite. Somewhere in the middle of the third game, without either of them quite deciding it, they began to talk. Carefully at first, books. The old Duke, she spoke of him the way soldiers speak of dead friends, in small, exact, guarded pieces. Then India, because she asked, and he found himself telling her things about the war he had never told anyone in Silk. Not the parade stories. The true ones, the quiet, heavy ones. And she listened the way almost no one listens, with her whole still attention, and asked the one question no one ever asked. Not were you brave, but were you afraid? Constantly, he said, fear's not the enemy, fear is information. She looked at him for a long moment, this thin girl with a year of cold soup behind her, and said softly as if to herself, Yes, it is. It became, without a word of agreement, a ritual. Not every night, but some nights 2, 3 times a week. A candle would be burning in the library, and the board would be set, and they would play and talk in that hushed, stolen country between midnight and 2. He learned that she was cleverer than anyone he'd met in the county. She learned that his courtesy was armor, and that behind it lived a man who missed plain speaking the way she missed warm bread. Neither of them called it anything. Both of them, walking back through dark corridors to cold rooms, carried it like a coal cupped in the hands. But she never told him. Not about the letters, not about the trust, not about Dr. Marsh's file or the words she'd heard slide through the drawing-room door. Twice he gave her the opening, gently, sideways, a soldier leaving a gate unlatched. Twice she looked at that open gate and walked past it. Because Thomas the footman had helped her and Thomas was gone. Because Dr. Fell had spoken for her, and Harrow was already hunting a tamer doctor. Because everything and everyone that touched her, this house destroyed, and this man, this decent, unsuspecting man, was living in a den of wolves and did not know it. And if she told him and he believed her, he would do something direct, because he was a soldier and directness was his native tongue. And the wolves would smile and produce their files and their doctors, and it would be his word, the word of a stranger, 3 weeks a duke, against the Duchess of Ashcombe, backed by medical men, before a county that had loved her for 30 years. No, she would not hand him a war he could not win. She had 5 months of practice at protecting people by staying silent. What Clara had forgotten, what people who live too long among wolves always forget, is that silence protects no one forever. Someone in that house was paid to notice candlelight. It was a Tuesday when the Duchess summoned Harrow to the morning room and closed the door. Clara knew, because Clara had learned, over a long year, exactly which doors mattered. And there was a linen cupboard off the service passage where a person shelving pillow slips could hear nearly every word said in the morning room, if the person stood very still and hated herself only a little. 3 times this week, the Duchess was saying, her voice was not raised, it was worse than raised, it was flat, in the library until 2 in the morning, playing chess. She said the word as if it were something scraped off a boot. Do you know what my brother-in-law used to call her? My girl. I endured 5 years of my girl. I will not endure it from a jumped-up major with a borrowed title. The certificate, Harrow began, is one signature short and has been for 3 months because you cannot manage one stubborn village doctor. A silence. Clara pressed her cheek against a shelf of cold linen and did not breathe. Listen to me. Every night she sits across that board, she is winning. She doesn't need to say a word. She is a young woman with sad eyes, and he is a lonely man in a strange house. And I have watched this play before, Harrow. I know how it ends. It ends with him asking questions we cannot afford. So it ends now. Write to your Dr. Cardew in town. Offer whatever must be offered. I want 2 signatures on that certificate and that girl in a private asylum before the month is out. And if the Duke objects, he is her host. Legally he might. The Duke, said the Duchess, objects to nothing he doesn't know about. It will be done while he is away. The Michaelmas Assizes will take him to town for a week. I'll see to it that they do. He will come home to find that poor Miss Whitfield's health required sudden care, that it was all very sad and very proper and signed by 2 physicians. A pause, and then the Duchess's voice again lower, with something new in it that made the hair rise on Clara's neck. And Harrow, if your doctor disappoints me, if the certificates fail, you will find another way to remove her. I no longer greatly care which. Footstep at the door, silence. Clara stood in the dark among the clean linen for a long, long time, holding a pillow slip she had no memory of picking up, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Before the month is out. The candle in the library burned alone that night. The Duke sat with the chessboard set and waiting until 2:30, watching the door that never opened, telling himself she was tired, telling himself it meant nothing. Upstairs in the attic, Clara sat on her narrow bed with her arms around her knees, doing the coldest arithmetic of her life. She had perhaps 3 weeks. She had no money she could touch, no letter that could escape this house, one doctor's stubbornness for a shield, and now, because of her, they meant to send away the only friend she had and strike while he was gone. So it ends now, the Duchess had said. Yes, Clara whispered to the dark, and her voice did not shake at all. It does. Clara had made her decision in the dark, and it was this. She would tell him everything. Not a letter. Letters died in this house. Not a hint. Hints could be smiled away. She would sit across the chessboard from Nathaniel Vane one last time before they packed him off to the Michaelmas Assizes, and she would lay it all out like pieces on the board. The trust, the letters, the doctor's file, the words she'd heard through the drawing-room door, and the older, darker things she believed about a strong man dead in a single autumn. He might not believe her. He might think her exactly what the file said she was. That was the risk. But she had counted her remaining days on her fingers, and silence had stopped being a shield. It was just a slower way of losing. She never got the chance. The Duchess had spent 30 years in great houses. She knew better than anyone that the first move wins the game. It began at breakfast, 2 days before the Duke was to leave for town. The Duchess came down late, unheard of, with one hand pressed to her throat, and her face arranged into beautiful distress. Her emerald brooch was gone. Not just any brooch, she explained, voice trembling exactly enough. The asterisk brooch, the one her late husband had given her on their wedding day. Irreplaceable, beyond price. She had worn it Sunday, it had lain in its case since, and now the case stood open and empty. What followed had all the spontaneity of a military parade. Harrow proposed a search of the house, reluctantly, gravely, as one performing a painful duty. The Duchess protested that she could never suspect anyone under her roof. Harrow insisted that the innocent had nothing to fear. It went, Nathaniel thought, watching over his coffee cup, remarkably like a scene that had been rehearsed with the furniture moved back. He said only, "Search then all rooms, mine first." That threw them for exactly one heartbeat. He saw it, the tiny stumble in the choreography. And then the machine rolled on. 2 footmen, the butler, the housekeeper with her ring of keys, up the stairs and along the corridors, opening drawers, lifting mattresses, a procession of theatrical thoroughness through rooms that interested nobody. Until the attic. They found it in Clara's room. Of course they found it in Clara's room. It was sewn with neat small stitches into the lining of her old carpet bag, the one she'd carried into this house 5 years ago. The housekeeper drew it out into the gray attic light, green fire in a nest of thread, and around it, wrapped for good measure, one of Clara's own handkerchiefs, initials showing. Clara stood in the doorway of her own room and watched her life end with a small, cold, distant feeling, as if it were happening to a girl in a story. Sewn in, she thought numbly. They even chose thread to match the lining. Such careful people. They assembled in the drawing room like a tribunal, the Duchess grieving into a lace handkerchief, Harrow somber at her shoulder with, and this was the masterstroke, a leather folder already under his arm. The servants who had witnessed the discovery. The Duke, standing at the window with his back to the light so that no one could read his face. And Clara in the middle of the carpet, alone. I shall not call the magistrate. The Duchess's voice was soft, wounded, infinitely merciful. Whatever she has done, she was dear to my brother-in-law, and I will not see her hanged or transported. There is a delicate pause, a glance at Harrow, the folder opening on cue, another explanation, a kinder one. Dr. Marsh has observed her for many months, the refusal of food, the night wandering, the secretiveness, the hiding of objects. There is a name for this affliction in young women. He has long suspected that poor Miss Whitfield is not wicked but ill. And illness, your grace, we do not punish. Illness we place in proper care. There it was, the whole trap sprung in the soft voice of Christian charity. Thief or madwoman, the prison or the asylum, 2 doors and both of them theirs. Miss Whitfield, said Harrow gently, pen already in his hand, have you anything to say? Everything. She had everything to say, and every word of it was fatal. Say the brooch was placed there, and Dr. Marsh's file grew a page, persecution mania. Say they intercept my letters, another page. Say I believe the late Duke was poisoned and I have eaten nothing but cold soup for a year to stay alive, and they would not even need Dr. Cardew. They could commit her by luncheon on that sentence alone, and every honest servant in the room would sorrowfully agree they'd heard her say it. The truth had been dug as her grave, and they were all waiting kindly for her to lie down in it. So Clara Whitfield looked at her own hands and said the only sentence that could not be used against her. I did not take it. Oh, my dear, sighed the Duchess, with a compassion that would have graced a saint, of course you believe that. The silence that followed was the worst of Clara's life, because in that silence she finally looked up. She could not help it at the man by the window, and she could read nothing in his face at all. Nothing. He stood in his black coat with the light behind him, remote as a judge, and the small, warm world of midnight chess seemed suddenly like something she had dreamed in a fever, and Clara understood with perfect clarity how this would look to any sane man on earth. A penniless girl, sewn stones, initialed handkerchief medical file. 10 days ago he hadn't known her name. He believes them, she thought, and the floor tilted under her. Of course he believes them. Everyone always believes them. Then the Duke spoke. A question, madam. His voice was mild. It was the same mildness the servants would say afterward as the night of the cold soup. You say the brooch has lain in its case since Sunday. Miss Whitfield, I'm told, has kept to her room this week at your instruction on the doctor's advice. Her meals go up on trays, so that I understand the sequence. When do you suggest she took it? A pause, very small, the sound of choreography missing a step. Servant stairs, said Harrow smoothly. At night. The whole house knows she wanders at night, your grace. Ah, said the Duke. The whole house knows, yes. I find the whole house knows a great many things about Miss Whitfield. He came away from the window at last, unhurried, and Clara saw his face, and it was not the face of a man who had been fooled. It was the face of a man counting guns. Here is what will happen. The brooch was found under my roof. If an offense was committed, it was committed in my house, against my family, which makes the decision mine. Mine alone. A glance, courteous as a blade, at the folder in Harrow's hands. Not the doctor's, not the magistrate's. I have never in my life made a decision of consequence in an hour, and I don't propose to begin with a woman's whole future. I will take a week. A week. The Duchess's handkerchief stopped moving. Nathaniel, dear Duke, the assizes, you are expected in town. Town will keep. But surely, while this hangs over us, the doctor should at least. No, one word, and for the first time since he had entered that house, Nathaniel Vane let them hear the parade ground under the politeness. Until I decide, this house stands still. Miss Whitfield keeps to her room for her own protection. There is a thief or worse among us after all. Not a flicker of a smile. No visitors, no letters in or out. No doctors, no asterisk doctors, madam, hers or yours or anyone's. Nothing leaves Ashcombe and nothing enters it without my hand on the order. I've held towns under quieter sieges than this. I know how it's done. He turned to Clara then, and for a moment, half a moment, the judge's face was gone. Miss Whitfield, you'll be escorted up. It's not kindly meant to confine you, but confined you'll be, and I'll ask your patience for 1 week. Clara, who had braced herself to lose everything, found her voice from somewhere. I have nowhere else to be, Your Grace. No, he said quietly, nor have I, and when this is settled, the pause was so slight that only she could have caught it, you still owe me a 4th game. He walked out. The tribunal sat in its beautiful drawing room, gutted. In one stroke, without one discourteous word, the soldier had frozen the entire board. No Dr. Cardew through the gates, no certificate, no asylum coach, no letters to town, their whole quiet machinery jammed for 7 days by a man who had learned sieges from the other side of the walls. He knows nothing, said Harrow at last uncertainly. He suspects perhaps, but he knows nothing, and in a week. In a week, said the Duchess. Her voice had gone very calm, and the calm was the worst thing Clara's friends below stairs had ever heard in it. She rose, smoothed her black silk, and looked out at the October garden with the expression of a woman revising a menu. He has given us the week too, Harrow. He is one man in a house of my people, and he has just told us exactly how long we have. See that you use it. Upstairs, behind a locked door, Clara sat very still on her narrow bed and allowed herself, for the first time in a year, one single tear, not of despair. He asked when. Nobody who believes them asks when. And 3 floors below, in the great stone kitchen, the Duke of Ashcombe walked in unannounced at 9 o'clock at night, pulled out a wooden chair, sat down at the scrubbed table as easily as a sergeant at a mess bench, and said to the big gray-haired woman who stood frozen by her stove, "Mrs. Pott, isn't it? I'm told the whole house knows everything. I find the kitchen usually knows it first. So." He set something down gently on the table between them. It was a white soup bowl. "Tell me about the cold soup." For a long moment, Mrs. Pott looked at the white bowl on her kitchen table the way a soldier looks at an unexploded shell. Then she wiped her hands on her apron slowly twice, though they were already clean, and said, "It's the girl's digestion, Your Grace. Doctor's orders. Cold food for a delicate stomach." The Duke turned the bowl gently with one finger. "That's the Duchess's answer. Word for word, near enough. It's a good answer. It only has the one flaw." He looked up. "I asked the doctor. Dr. Fell in the village. I rode down to him this afternoon before the gates were sealed. He's never in his life prescribed a cooling diet to Miss Whitfield. He tells me no physician on earth would starve a wasting girl on cold broth. He tells me one other thing, too." The Duke's voice stayed level and quiet. He tells me that when he examined her in August, he found a young woman half-starved, and yet these were his words, the healthiest half-starved patient I have ever seen. No tremor, clear eyes, sound heart, as if the starving were somehow keeping her well. He let that sit in the warm kitchen air. Now, I've sat at mess tables from Lisbon to Lucknow, Mrs. Pott, and I have never once seen a cook, a proud cook, a 20 years in service cook, send up a cold dish night after night for a year and bear the shame of it. Not for orders, not for wages. There's only one thing I can think of that a woman like you would bear it for. And what would that be? Said Mrs. Pott very low. A reason that matters more than pride. The kitchen fire cracked and settled. Somewhere above them the great house lay silent, floor upon floor of it, like something holding its breath. "You want to be careful, Your Grace," said Mrs. Pott at last. Her voice had changed, the servant's varnish gone off it, something older and harder underneath. "Asking questions in this house. Better men than you have died of less." "Better men than me," said the Duke, "usually do." He leaned forward. "Say it, Mrs. Pott, whatever it is. You've carried it alone for a year, and I think it's crushing you, and I am the one man under this roof they cannot dismiss. Say it." And Mrs. Pott, who had not wept when her husband died, nor when her sons went for soldiers, nor once in 20 years of burnt hands and 4 in the morning fires, sat down heavily on a kitchen chair and put her big red hands over her face. "It began with the master," she said. "The old Duke. God rest him, it began with him, and I never saw it. That's what I can't be shriven of, sir. I never saw it. It came out of her then in pieces, the way a wall comes down. The old Duke's last summer, his stomach turning against him, his strength going, and Mr. Harrow so attentive, so devoted, coming down to her kitchen twice a week with a blue glass bottle. A strengthening tonic, Mrs. Pott. Town doctor's orders. 2 spoonfuls in his Grace's broth. He won't take medicine willingly. You know how he is, so we say nothing and stir it in." And she had stirred it in, with her own hand, into her own good broth. For the master she'd fed for 20 years, because who questions a doctor's tonic, brought by the trusted man of business, with the Duchess herself nodding kindly by the door. "He got worse all that summer," she said, muffled behind her hands. "And the worse he got, the more they sent down the tonic, and I stirred it, Your Grace, every bottle. And in October we buried him, and I stood at the grave thinking, well, God takes whom he pleases." "And then," said the Duke quietly, "and then 2 weeks after the funeral, Mr. Harrow comes down my kitchen stairs with that same blue bottle in his hand." Mrs. Pott lifted her face, and what was in it made even Nathaniel Vane, who had seen most things, go still. "Smiling, sir, smiling like church. And he says to me, Mrs. Pott, poor Miss Whitfield's taken her guardian's death very hard. The doctors prescribed her a strengthening tonic, 2 spoonfuls in her evening soup. But you know how young ladies are about medicine, so we'll say nothing and stir it in." The fire cracked. The Duke did not move. "The same bottle," he said. Same bottle, the same words, the same smile. Her hands had curled into fists on the scrubbed table, and I stood there with my heart going like a copper on boil day, and I understood 2 things at once, sir, clear as scripture. I understood what I'd been stirring into my master's broth all that summer, and I understood they meant to do it again, slower, maybe, careful-like, just enough to make a healthy girl sicken and fade in front of witnesses, and that they'd chosen my hands to do it with. Again. Why not refuse? Why not go to a magistrate too? To who? It came out of her like steam from under a lid. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but you've been in this county 3 weeks. The magistrate shot pheasant with her Grace's late husband 30 year running. Dr. Marsh eats her dinners. Say it out loud, the Duchess of Ashcombe and her steward are poisoners. And count the minutes till I'm in the road without a character like poor Thomas, or in the madhouse alongside the girl, and who stands between that child and the blue bottle then. The next cook they hire," she shook her gray head slowly. No, sir, I'm not clever. I can't hardly write. Took me the whole of an evening to letter 4 words fit to read. I had no proof and no friends and no way to warn her that wouldn't get us both destroyed. I had one thing only. I had the pot. And so she told him. She had done the only thing a cook could do. Every evening, the moment the soup came together, and before another soul touched it, she ladled out one bowl, clean, safe, from the untouched pot, and set it on the stone shelf in the cold servery, out of sight. An hour later, when the Duchess's own maid, Baxter, came down as she came down every single evening, to keep the kitchen company, she said, standing over the pot with her blue bottle and her cold eyes until the tonic was stirred in and the trays went up, Mrs. Potts stirred and said nothing, and let her watch. And in the dark of the service passage between kitchen and stairs, her sister's boy William, a footman with steady hands and a shut mouth, made the exchange. The dose bowl went into the pig pail. The clean bowl went up to the dining room. Cold, always cold. It had stood an hour on stone. There was no fire in the servery, no moment to warm it with Baxter's eyes on every flame in that kitchen. Cold was the price. Cold was the proof of safety. Every bowl that steamed in that house might carry the blue bottle in it, the sauces, the sweets, the wine jellies her grace sent down the table so kindly. Only the cold bowl, only that one, came from the clean pot in Mrs. Potts' own hand. A year, she said. 300 nights near enough, and William and me, the only 2 souls on earth who knew. And the whole house despising me for a cruel old woman, and that poor child eating her cold soup like a lady, thinking I'd turned on her with the rest. And I let her think it, sir. I made her think it. Because the day she looked at me kindly in a corridor was the day Baxter would start wondering why. Her voice finally broke on one plain sentence, and it was somehow worse than weeping. She used to call me Potty when she was 19, and I have not let that girl thank me for 300 bowls of soup. The kitchen was very quiet. The Duke of Ashcombe sat looking at this heavy, gray, unlettered woman who had fought a secret war in his house for a year, alone with a ladle, and then he did something no duke had done in the history of Ashcombe Hall. He stood and took the cook's rough red hands in both of his, and bowed over them as if she were a countess. "Mrs. Pott," he said, "I have commanded brave men on 3 continents, and I am not sure I ever met your equal among them." "You'll make me spoil my apron, sir," said Mrs. Pott, and spoiled it anyway. It was another hour before he rose to go, an hour of low voices over the banked fire, of who and when and how. And near the end of it, she told him the last thing, the thing she had never told even William. "I kept one, your grace." She said it in a whisper, glancing at the black window as if the garden had ears. "A bottle, full or near. Last winter Mr. Harrow left one on my dresser and never counted after it, and I said it broke, and I mopped up water and vinegar to show for it, and the true one," she looked at the floor by the hearth at one flagstone among 50, "the true one's been under that stone 11 months. His writing on the label, sir. His own hand. Miss W. 2 spoonfuls." Nathaniel Vane looked at that gray flagstone, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he felt the ground of this fight shift under his feet. "Leave it exactly where it lies," he said softly. "Speak of it to no one, not William, not Miss Whitfield. If I'm right, it will hang a man, and if they ever suspect it exists, Mrs. Pott, your life is worth 1 bowl of soup in this house. Do you understand me?" She nodded. He stopped at the kitchen door, one hand on the frame, and looked back. "One more thing, the note. Eat nothing else. 4 words you said a whole evening to letter them." A pause. "Why only once? Why never again?" "Because she minded it, sir," said Mrs. Pott simply. "First time and forever, like the clever girl she is. And every scrap of paper after that would have been my neck and hers for nothing." She met his eyes across the warm, dark kitchen. "You don't waste words in a war, your grace. I'd have thought they taught you that in the army." The Duke laughed quietly in the sleeping house and went up the dark stairs with a bottle of arsenic burning in his mind and something else burning under it, something with the Duchess's smiling face on it, and he thought, evidence. A cook's word and a buried bottle, a bottle anyone could claim was planted, and hadn't they just shown him with an emerald exactly how well they understood planted evidence? No, he needed the rest of it, the trust accounts, the lawyers. The dead man's own voice, if it existed anywhere on paper. All of it was in London. And that was the devil of it. He saw the shape of the trap even as he walked up out of the warm kitchen into the cold sleeping house. He could not win this war from inside Ashcombe Hall. To save her, he would have to leave her locked in an attic in a house of wolves, with a week's truce he himself had declared, and no power on earth to enforce it once his carriage passed the gates. 2 floors above, a candle still burned in the Duchess's window. She was not reading. She was standing at the glass in her black shawl, looking down at the faint warm light spilling from the kitchen door across the frosted yard, and she stood there without moving for a very long time. Then she rang for Baxter. "Fetch my writing case," said the Duchess of Ashcombe. "It seems we shall need Dr. Cardew after all, and rather sooner than I thought." The next morning, the Duke of Ashcombe did something entirely proper and entirely strategic. He summoned the accused for questioning. No one could object. He was the man deciding her case. Naturally, he must examine her. So Clara Whitfield was escorted down to the library by the housekeeper, who was instructed to wait outside the door. "The accused may speak more freely alone," said the Duke, in a voice that ended discussion. And for the first time in 8 days, the two of them stood face to face with no audience but 4,000 books. The chessboard still sat by the window. Neither of them looked at it. Both of them saw nothing else. "Miss Whitfield," he kept his voice low, "doors in this house had ears the way ships have barnacles. We have perhaps 20 minutes and I'm going to spend them being blunt. I know about the soup." Clara went very still. "I know it was never cruelty. I know whose hands kept you alive for a year, and I know what's in the blue bottle, and I believe I'd stake my commission on it that the same bottle emptied itself into your guardian before you. I know the brooch was sewn, not stolen. What I do not have," he said, "is one shred of proof that would survive 10 minutes in front of a magistrate who has shot the Duchess's pheasants for 30 years. And so I'm going to London. Tomorrow, at first light." "London," Clara repeated. The word came out strange. She had spent a year learning that hope was a food she could not afford, and here was a full plate of it, steaming, and her whole body had forgotten what to do. "Your father's lawyers. The trust accounts, I promise you Harrow's hand is in them to the elbow, and embezzlement is a crime with asterisk paper asterisk, Miss Whitfield, paper that doesn't faint and can't be called hysterical. And one thing more." He paused. "Your guardian wrote to his own solicitor in London the week before he died. The old butler let it slip, a letter he carried to the post himself, because his grace wouldn't trust it to the estate bag. It never had an answer. I intend to find out what was in it." Clara's mind, starved and cornered for a year, did what it had been built to do. It moved like a chess piece. "Then you'll need names. The town doctor they've bought is called Cardew. The certificate lacks one signature. Dr. Fell refused them in August. Marsh's file goes back to March. Baxter carries the bottle down each evening at 7. And Harrow answers my lawyer's letters in my guardian's names. You'll want samples of his hand. There are years of it in the estate office, 3rd drawer. He never locks it. Why would he? It's only a madwoman watching." She stopped. He was staring at her. "What?" "Nothing," said the Duke of Ashcombe, in the voice of a man revising his entire understanding of the war. "Only that I've had staff officers who briefed worse than you, and they'd been at it 20 years. Something almost happened then. The room tilted toward it. Whatever it was, and both of them, being who they were, stepped back from the edge in the same instant. 4 days, he said instead. 5 at most. I've given written orders. My week stands, the house stays sealed, your case waits for my return and no one else's judgment. Wills, the butler, holds copies. Dr. Fell will call at the gates each afternoon and be turned away, and note that he was turned away, a witness outside the walls. It's thin, Clara. Her name, the first time, quiet as a dropped stitch. Neither of them acknowledged it and neither of them missed it. It's thin, and I know it's thin. If I could put you in the carriage tomorrow I would, but the moment you pass those gates in my company, you're a fleeing thief and I'm the fool who ran off with a madwoman a month after inheriting, and they'll have the law and the story both. I need 4 days. Eat nothing but the cold bowl. Speak to no one. Sign nothing. Whatever they threaten, whatever they promise, your name goes on no paper in this house. Can you hold 4 days? I've held a year, said Clara Whitfield. He looked at her, thin as paper, steady as stone, and whatever the thing was that they had both stepped back from, it was suddenly much closer, and he was moving toward the door because 20 minutes was 20 minutes. Her voice stopped him with his hand on the latch. Your Grace, the 4th game. The board stood by the window, ivory and rosewood, patient. We haven't time to finish one, he said. Then we won't finish. She crossed to the board and with one thin finger moved a single white pawn 2 squares forward and left it there. Your move when you come home. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached down, answered with a black knight, and walked out of the library without another word, because there are moments when a man says nothing or says everything, and he could not afford everything. Not yet. The next morning, before the mist was off the lawns, his carriage went down the long avenue and out through the gates, and the great house of Ashcombe stood in the grey light, and listened to the wheels fade, and slowly, like a held breath released, came back to life as its own true self. The Duchess allowed 1 full day for the sake of appearances. On the second morning the gates opened for Dr. Marsh. Summoned before his Grace's departure, the gate record would say, in Harrow's neat hand, and who could prove otherwise. On the second afternoon, they opened again for a smooth gentleman in a brown coat who was merely passing through the county and would be delighted to pay his respects. Dr. Cardew, of town. They examined Clara together in her attic room for 40 minutes, with Baxter standing at the door. Clara sat on her narrow bed with her hands folded and followed her orders. She signed nothing. She spoke, beyond her name and asterisk no, thank you, not one word. It was the only shield left to her, silence, and she watched with a strange detached horror as they turned even that into a weapon. Mutism, wrote Dr. Cardew, morbid suspicion of medical men. Refuses nourishment, this while her untouched dinner tray, sent up hot and fragrant and dosed for all she knew, sat by the door as evidence. Concurs entirely with Dr. Marsh's findings of long-standing derangement. 2 doctors, 2 signatures. It was done in 40 minutes, the thing a year had been building, and the certificate went down the stairs in Baxter's hand like a small white coffin lid. The petition, humbly brought by Her Grace the Dowager Duchess of Ashcombe, the nearest thing to family the poor young woman possesses, was before the magistrate by Wednesday evening. The magistrate, who had indeed shot the Duchess's pheasants for 30 years, and who was given to understand that the new Duke was regrettably detained in town, signed with sorrow and a very good dinner. A private asylum was engaged. Harrow knew of one, discreet, expensive, secure 40 miles north. The coach was ordered for Friday morning. Friday, 1 day before the Duke's promised return. The Duchess was not a woman to leave a margin narrower than necessary, but she was also not a woman to miss the poetry of it. He would come home to a house swept clean, every paper in order, every servant word perfect, and nothing left of Clara Whitfield but a sad story and a locked attic room. He will rage, she told Harrow calmly over the Thursday accounts. For a month, perhaps 2. Then winter will come and the county will dine him, and there are so very many pretty girls in England with no files at all. Men heal, Harrow, it's their great gift. But the house she was so sure of, her house, her people, the house had been keeping a ledger of its own for a year, and on Thursday night it moved. It moved in the shape of a footman named William, Mrs. Potts' sister's boy, 20 years old, with steady hands and a shut mouth, who had swapped 300 bowls in the dark and asked no questions. At 11:30, while Baxter made her last round of the corridors, William went out through the scullery window, crossed the kitchen garden bent double below the wall, took the fastest horse in the stables, the Duke's own grey, because if you are going to hang you may as well hang for a Duke's horse, and was through the park fence by the old Drover's Gap and on the London road before midnight, riding the way a man rides with his aunt's voice in his ears. Find him, the Golden Cross, Charing Cross, that's where the quality put up. Kill the horse if you must, kill yourself if you must, but find him, Will, they've moved it to Friday. Friday came up grey and raining. The coach arrived at 10. Black, closed, respectable, with a driver who did not meet anyone's eyes and a broad-shouldered attendant in a dark coat whose profession no one needed explained. The household was assembled in the hall. The Duchess believed in witnesses, in everyone's hands being dipped, and so it was before 40 silent servants that Clara Whitfield came down the great staircase of Ashcombe Hall for the last time, in her grey dress, carrying the old carpet-bag they had so kindly emptied of emeralds and returned to her. She came down with her back straight and her chin level, the way she had eaten every bowl of that soup, and the hall was so quiet you could hear the rain. "God heal you, my dear," said the Duchess of Ashcombe tenderly for 40 pairs of ears. "You will be in our prayers every day." Clara looked at her for a long, level moment. "Yes," she said, "I imagine I will be." At the door, passing the kitchen corridor, her steps slowed, she could not help it, and there, at the end of the passage, stood Mrs. Pott, apron on, big red hands hanging empty. Their eyes met down that long stone corridor, and Clara knew everything, 300 bowls, the stone shelf, the whole silent year of it, and she could not say one word of thanks, not one, because Baxter's cold eyes were on the both of them and Nathaniel's warning stood. The day they suspect is the day she's worth one bowl of soup. So Clara Whitfield did the only thing there was left to do. She curtsied. There in front of Baxter and the world, the accused madwoman, the disgraced thief, she gathered her grey skirts and curtsied to the cook, low and slow and correct, the way one curtsies to a duchess, and walked out through the great door into the rain with her head high, leaving behind her a passage full of witnesses who did not understand what they had seen, and one heavy grey-haired woman standing by the kitchen door with her apron pressed to her mouth. The coach door shut. The wheels bit the gravel. The Duchess watched from the morning-room window until the black roof sank from sight below the brow of the park, and then she let out a slow breath, 30 years long, and turned back to her accounts. It was done. The house was hers. Every person in it was hers, every gate, every letter, every key. She had counted everything, except one empty bed in the footman's attic, and one grey horse missing from the stable since midnight, and one exhausted rider somewhere on the flooded London road, 20 years old, mud to the eyebrows, 3 hours behind schedule and still riding. The coach turned north at the crossroads, toward the asylum into the rain. And 40 miles the other way, in a lawyer's chambers smelling of dust and sealing wax, the Duke of Ashcombe sat down at last before an old man with white whiskers, who drew from his strongbox a single unopened letter and laid it on the desk between them and said, "His Grace's final instruction to this office, sir, was most particular. This was to be opened only in the presence of his successor, or of Miss Clara Whitfield. We have been waiting a year for either of you to walk through that door." The letter was 1 page long. The old Duke had never wasted words either. "Trent, I grow worse, and I have begun to believe there is a reason I grow worse. The accounts do not answer. Harrow's figures are beautiful and wrong, and a man does not make beautiful errors. I have watched him this fortnight, and I am afraid not for myself. I am old for my girl. If I die before I can act, believe nothing you are told from this house. Question everything signed in my name after Michaelmas, and above all look to Clara. Her trust, her letters, her health, all of it, Trent, guard all of it. I took her father's hand and gave him my word, and I find I cannot die easy with the taking of it. If I am wrong, burn this and laugh at an old man. If I am right, God forgive me for being slow. Do not let them have her. Old Mr. Trent read it aloud in his dry lawyer's voice, and when he finished, the chambers were very quiet. He wrote that on the 2nd of October, Trent said. He was dead on the 9th. We received it on the 11th with his death already in the newspapers, sealed inside a cover instructing that it be opened only before his successor or Miss Whitfield herself. Sir, this office has written to Ashcombe Hall 14 times this year regarding Miss Whitfield's trust. 14 times we have received answers, prompt, proper, grieved answers, describing a young woman too disordered in her mind to conduct business, and enclosing receipts for her care signed by her guardians. He laid a bundle of correspondence on the desk like a man laying down a dead thing. This office has paid out, against those receipts, some £4,000 of that child's money, and I will go to my grave ashamed of every letter, because the hand that signed them is very good, your grace. It is very, very good, but it is not the hand of a dead man's honest steward, and you tell me the girl herself never saw a penny nor wrote a line of it. Show me the sums, said Nathaniel. The whole trust, what was it before they began bleeding it? Trent told him. Nathaniel Vane, Duke of Ashcombe, master of one of the great houses of England, and as he alone knew of its rather smaller bank account, sat back in his chair and began, helplessly, to laugh. Your Grace, forgive me, he wiped his eyes. It's only that they've spent a year calling her a charity, a burden, a penniless dependent eating their cold soup. He shook his head slowly. Mr. Trent, even after everything that man has stolen, that girl in the attic could buy Ashcombe Hall entire and the pheasants and have change for a second one. She's the richest woman in the county, and they starved her below the salt. It was at that exact moment, 11:15 on Friday morning, that the outer door of the chambers burst open against all the customs of the law, and something entered that had once been a footman, hatless, bootless on one foot, painted brown to the eyebrows with road mud, swaying like a sapling. Beg pardon, William got hold of the doorframe. Beg pardon, sirs, Golden Cross said you'd be here. His eyes found the Duke, and the last of his strength went into 6 words. They moved it, your Grace. Today. The coach comes today. For 1 second Nathaniel Vane sat perfectly still, the way the ground is still before artillery answers. Then he was on his feet, and the war was moving. And certified copies of everything, the letter, the correspondence, the receipts. You come with me or your partner does. I need the law in a coat beside me, not in a box. William, food in one hand, and tell me while you eat. What time, what road, what asylum? He was already through the door, down the stairs, into the grey London roar, counting hours as he went. 40 miles home. The coach gone north at 10. 40 more to the madhouse gates. Post horses at every stage, and the rain coming harder. Can it be done? Panted Trent's junior partner, running. It'll be dusk, said the Duke. It can be done at dusk. For Clara, that whole endless day was rain on a coach roof. They had not been cruel to her, that was somehow the worst of it. The broad-shouldered attendant handed her in politely, offered her a rug for her knees, spoke of the weather. The machine did not need cruelty anymore. The papers were signed. The doors ahead were iron. Cruelty had done its work and could afford to be civil now. She sat with the emptied carpet-bag on her lap and watched the hedges of everything she knew go by and drown in the wet gray afternoon. and she held two things against the cold, the way you hold coals. A pawn 2 squares forward, a knight's answer. Hold 4 days, he had said. She had held 3.5. It hadn't been enough, and no one would even be able to tell him why the board in the library stood abandoned with the game 1 move old. Dusk came on early with the rain. The coach slowed. She heard the driver call, iron gates groaned somewhere ahead, and through the streaming window she saw a long dark house with small high windows and lamps being brought out under the dripping trees. The attendant gathered his coat. "Journey's end, miss," he said, not unkindly, and Clara Whitfield straightened her back one more time, the last time, she supposed, and reached for her bag. And then the world filled up with hooves. Afterward, the asylum porter would tell it for years, how 3 riders came out of the rain at the full gallop like the wrath of God, and the first of them put his horse between the coach and the gates and stood it there, steaming, and how the man's voice cracked across that courtyard like a whole parade ground. "Stand away from that door." The attendant was a large man and confident of his paperwork. He got out one full sentence, "Sir, this female is committed by order," before the rider came off the horse and was suddenly very close and quite quiet, which was infinitely worse. "I am the Duke of Ashcombe. That is my ward. Your papers are 2 doctors bought with stolen money, a petition sworn by a poisoner's accomplice, and a magistrate who will be very fortunate to escape the assizes himself, and this gentleman behind me is the law of Chancery, dripping wet with the proofs in his saddlebag. Now," the Duke stepped past him and put his hand on the coach door, "you may note in your book that you were obstructed. Spell the name however you like." He opened the door. The lamplight came in with him and the rain. Clara sat there, white and straight, gray dress, carpetbag on her knees, and there must have been 100 proper things to say, ducal things, legal things, and Nathaniel Vane, hero of 3 campaigns, looked at her and managed none of them. "You left the board in check," he said. "It's been driving me mad for 4 days." "It has not," said Clara, with the last steady breath in her body. "It's been driving you home. And then her face broke, finally, after a year, in front of the attendant and the porter and the rain and everyone, and he lifted her down out of the black coach as if she were made of the whole world's glass, and the porter would tell that part for years too. They came up the avenue of Ashcombe Hall at 10 the next morning, in borrowed sunshine, the Duke, Miss Whitfield, a London lawyer, and a footman asleep sitting up. They said afterward that the Duchess knew before the carriage stopped, that she stood at the morning room window and watched it come, and understood everything from the simple arithmetic of the figures inside it, and that she went out to the hall anyway with her spine straight and her face perfect. "You may say what you like of that woman," they said, "but she went out like a duchess." What followed in the great hall, before the magistrate, summoned by the Duke's rider at dawn and arrived sweating, before Dr. Fell, before Mr. Trent with his documents laid out on the long table like instruments before surgery, and before, at the Duke's specific order, the entire assembled household of Ashcombe Hall. He had learned that trick from the Duchess herself. Some things must be done in front of witnesses. Piece by piece, in a level voice, Nathaniel laid the year on the table. The dead man's letter, read aloud into a silence like deep water. 14 forged replies, set side by side with the true hand from the estate office's 3rd drawer. Even the magistrate, pale as his own linen now, could match the loops of it. £4,000 in false receipts. The certificates, and Dr. Fell's flat testimony of the August examination, and the county apothecaries, delivered slowly, that he had that morning tested the contents of a blue glass bottle and found white arsenic, in quantity sufficient to kill quietly over months, and that the label on the bottle, Miss W., 2 spoonfuls, was written in the same beautiful hand as the receipts. And when the magistrate asked hoarsely where such a bottle had been found this 12-month, the doors at the service end of the hall opened, and Mrs. Pot came up her own kitchen stairs into the great hall of Ashcombe with a flagstone's dirt still on her apron, and the bottle wrapped in clean linen like a christening child, and told them. All of it, the blue bottle and the master's broth. The same bottle, the same smile 2 weeks after the funeral, the stone shelf, the cold servery, William in the dark passage, 300 nights. She stood in front of the silks, and the law with her big red hands folded and told it plain and slow, cook fashion, the way you give a recipe you know by heart. And the household of Ashcombe Hall, 40 servants who had despised her for a year as the Duchess's cruelest creature, stood along the walls and wept, some of them aloud. "I've no learning," she finished to the magistrate, "and only the one thing to say for myself in law. Every soul in this house watched that girl eat cold soup for a year. I'm the reason she was alive to eat it." Through all of it, Harrow had stood very still by the great fireplace, gray as ash, watching his beautiful figures come apart. He broke only once at the bottle, and he broke in the only direction left to him. "Her Grace," his voice came out scraped. "Everything, every step I did nothing but what Her Grace." "Mr. Harrow." The Duchess's voice fell across his like a dropped blade. She had not moved from the foot of the stairs. She did not move now. She looked at the man who had been her instrument for 30 years, and she cut the rope with the calm of a woman declining a second cup of tea. "I asked you to manage a difficult household and a troubled ward. If you managed them with forgery and asterisk poison asterisk," the word placed delicately, at arm's length, like something soiled, "then you are a greater villain than even this morning has shown, and I thank God my brother-in-law was spared the knowing of it." And that was all. No paper bore her name. No servant had ever heard her order anything but soup served and doctors summoned. She had been careful for 30 years, and the law, staring straight at her, could not lay one finger on the ice. They took Harrow away that afternoon in a closed carriage, and if anyone appreciated the shape of that, they were kind enough not to say so in his hearing. Dr. Marsh was gone from the county within the week, Dr. Cardew within the day. The magistrate discovered urgent reasons to retire. The Duchess of Ashcombe, against whom nothing could be proved and everything was known, was informed by the Duke that same evening, courteously, in writing, before witnesses, that the dower house on the far edge of the estate stood ready to receive her, and that her removal to it was effective immediately and permanent. The law could not touch her. It didn't need to. The county did what the law could not, with invitations that stopped coming and carriages that stopped calling, and the great Duchess of Ashcombe lived out her years in 6 rooms at the end of a wet lane, perfectly provided for, completely alone, served, at her own bitter insistence, by no cook at all. She prepared her own meals until the day she died. It was said she never once ate soup again. Clara stood at the library window that evening and watched the Dower House cart go down the avenue in the long golden light. Nathaniel came and stood beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything, because a year was ending, and endings deserve a little silence. "Trent read me the figures on the road," he said at last. "You know what you are now. You could buy this house, this county, and me, and never notice the expense. You could go anywhere on earth tomorrow." He was looking out the window with the particular fixed calm of a brave man being a coward. "I find I need to know if you intend to." Clara Whitfield looked down at the chessboard by the window, at the little white pawn, still 2 squares forward, and the black knight beside it, still waiting, the game 4 days old and 1 move deep. She sat down at the white side of the board. "Your move," she said, "was made when you came home. I believe it's mine now, and I warn you, Your Grace." And the smile she gave him then was the one the house had not seen in a year, the one that had once made an old duke swear to dance at her wedding. "I intend to play a very long game." Healing, it turned out, took longer than justice. Justice had needed only a morning in the great hall, But a body that has lived a year on one cold bowl a day does not learn plenty overnight, and neither does a heart. Through that whole first winter, Clara ate like a bird, small, careful, wary, as if some part of her still stood sentry over every plate. Dr. Fell, now physician to the household and never once turned away at the gates, prescribed the only medicine he said was worth the name: warmth, time, and Mrs. Pott. In that order, twice daily. She spent that winter, more often than not, in the kitchen. It had begun on her third evening home. She had come down the kitchen stairs alone, after the house was quiet, and stood in the doorway of that warm stone kingdom. And Mrs. Pott had turned from her stove and gone quite still, and for a moment the two of them had simply looked at each other, the way you look at someone across a battlefield that has finally gone silent. "You called me Potty," said Mrs. Pott at last, gruffly, "when you were 19 and all bones and book learning. I don't suppose a great heiress remembers." "A great heiress," said Clara, "has been trying for a year to say thank you for 300 bowls of soup." Her voice cracked on it. She was never once allowed. "Well," said Mrs. Pott, "well." And then the ladle went down on the table with a clatter, and the girl who curtsied to a cook was gathered up into two big red arms and held the way she had not been held since her father died. And if both of them spoiled their collars, there was no Baxter left in that house to see it. After that, it was simply where Clara was. She learned to knead bread that winter and to laugh again, roughly in that order. Color came back to her face by Candlemas. And the first time Mrs. Pott set before her a bowl of white soup, hot, steam curling off it like a blessing, made start to finish by the cook's own guarded hands, Clara ate it slowly in the warm kitchen, with tears running quietly and steadily down a face that was smiling the whole time, and Mrs. Pott stood over her the entire bowl with her arms folded, guarding her still. The house mended around her. Thomas, the footman, was traced to a coaching in 2 counties away, brought back with a year's wages and no explanation asked, and nearly wept over his own livery. William was footman no longer. The Duke made him under-steward, since he has already demonstrated, said his Grace with a straight face, a superior grasp of estate transport. The gray horse he had stolen was found in his name in the stable book, a gift, and William was seen on quiet Sundays riding it very slowly and very proudly to church. And in the library, most evenings, a candle burned late over an ivory and rosewood board, and the long game went on. He proposed in March, in the kitchen. He had planned, he admitted afterward, something rather grander. The rose garden was discussed, and vetoed by the weather. The library was considered and lost its nerve. In the end, on an ordinary wet Tuesday evening, he came down the kitchen stairs to find Clara flour-dusted at the big scrubbed table and Mrs. Pott shelling walnuts by the fire, and the warmth of the room simply made the decision for him. Mrs. Pott took one look at his face and reached for her shawl. "I'll just see to the—" "Mrs. Pott." The Duke of Ashcombe stood at the foot of the stairs, and he was turning his signet ring around his finger, around and around, in a manner the men of his old regiment would not have believed. "Stay, if you please, I find that is—" He stopped, started again. "Miss Whitfield has no father living and no guardian, thank God, and no family in the world, except that she has, in every way that matters, one, and a man ought to ask." The walnuts went very quiet. "So I am asking." He looked at the big gray-haired woman by the fire, and he was not smiling. He was in deadly earnest, and that was the beauty of it. "Mrs. Pott, you kept her alive when it cost you everything to do it. I should like your permission to spend the rest of my life taking over the duty. I'll feed her warm, I'll guard her sleep, and I give you my word as a soldier she will never again eat one mouthful in fear at any table of mine. May I have her if she'll have me?" Mrs. Pott looked at him for a long, long moment, this Duke standing in her kitchen asking a cook for a lady's hand. And then she looked at Clara, white to the elbows in flour, shining like a lamp. "That's her answer to give, sir," said Mrs. Pott, magnificently composed, wiping her eyes with her apron. "But I'll say this. I've fed every man who sat at this house's table for 20 years, and you're the first one I'd trust with the recipe." "Clara," said Nathaniel Vane, and went down on one knee on the scrubbed stone floor of the kitchen, between the stove and the salt box. "You told me once you intended to play a very long game. Marry me, and we'll call it a draw every night for 50 years. Clara Whitfield looked down at him, at this man kneeling in flour dust in the warmest room of the house that had tried to bury her, and found that, after a year of guarding every word, the truest thing she had ever said cost nothing at all. "Checkmate," she said, "took you long enough." They were married in June, on the 17th, her birthday, chosen deliberately, so that the day the locked box had opened into silence would belong ever after to bells. The county came, of course. All of it. The same silks that had laughed their light poisonous laughter down the Duchess's table came and curtsied low to the new Duchess of Ashcombe, the richest woman in 3 counties, and if Clara felt anything watching them bend, she was gracious enough to keep it between herself and the memory of a cold bowl. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall, at the long table, and it was there that the new Duchess of Ashcombe gave the only order anyone ever remembered from that day. The first course was white soup, the old Duke's favorite, and it came to the table by her Grace's explicit instruction, every bowl from the scullery maids to the bishops, ladled from one single great pot, in full view of the whole company, steaming hot. No separate dishes, no special trays. One pot, one soup, one table, and the county understood the sermon without a word of it being preached. But the first bowl of all, before the bishop, before the duke, before anyone, the bride filled with her own hands, carried the length of the great hall in her wedding silk, while the whole assembly stood in silence, and set down before a broad, gray-haired woman in a new dress who had been seated, by the bride's arrangement and over her own furious objections, at the head table itself. Mrs. Pott looked at the bowl. Steam rose off it like a blessing. 20 years she had fed that house. No living soul had ever once served her. "Eat it while it's hot, Potty," said the Duchess of Ashcombe softly. "You're all bones and bravery." And Mrs. Pott, who had not wept at her own wedding, put her face into her big red hands in front of the entire county, and the Duke of Ashcombe rose, and raised his glass to her, and every guest in that hall, silk and scullery alike, rose with him. Ashcombe Hall keeps a strange custom. Visitors notice it sometimes, and the family never explains. Every year on the 9th evening of October, the long table in the great hall is laid as if for a feast, and at the far end of it, below where the salt would stand, one place is set apart. One plain white bowl, filled, at 7 o'clock exactly, with cold soup. No one sits there. No one touches it. It stands through the whole warm, noisy dinner. The Duke and Duchess of Ashcombe kept a loud table, full of children and dogs and argument, and it is carried away, untouched, when the candles are put out. The children grew up with it and thought all great houses had one. It was only when they were older, one by one, that they were taken into the library, shown a chessboard that was never allowed to be cleared, and told the story, the whole of it. The blue bottle, the stone shelf, the boy on the stolen gray horse, and the year their mother was kept alive, 300 nights running, by a cook who let the whole world despise her rather than let one bowl go up those stairs warm. New servants always asked, eventually. The asking was a tradition too, and old Wills the butler, and after him William Mr. William under steward, then steward, Gray himself in the end, would give the same answer, word for word, that had been handed down like the silver. That lad is to remind this house that kindness doesn't always look kind. Once, at this table, the coldest bowl in England was the only warm thing in it. Mrs. Pott ruled the kitchens of Ashcombe Hall for 11 more years, refused retirement twice, and died in great old age in a cottage with roses at the door, half a mile from her stove, with the Duchess of Ashcombe holding one hand and a grand goddaughter named Charlotte Pott Vane holding the other. She lies in the village churchyard under good stone. The Duke chose the plot, the Duchess chose the words. People who never heard the story pause at them sometimes, puzzled on their way through the use 7 words below her name and her years that make no sense at all unless you know. SHE served cold soup and warm courage. The soup at Ashcombe Hall has been served hot, to every soul at the table from one pot, for 50 years. Except one bowl, one night a year. Lest the house forget. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.